Angel Reese just told the Chicago Tribune she's not settling for the same shit we did this year, and demanded the Sky get the best players in the league to surround her. Sounds bold, right? Except here's the twist. She's leading the league in turnovers despite missing weeks of action and can still barely make a layup. She's so bad she just earned herself a suspension. Reese wanted to overhaul her teammates, but it might be her that the Sky actually need to move on from. So, is Angel Reese the WNBA's biggest hoax in WNBA history? She's definitely no Caitlin Clark. Imagine demanding your teammates get replaced, only to become the one your own franchise might be ready to cut loose. That's the situation Angel Reese walked herself into after her comments to the Chicago Tribune. She wasn't subtle either. Reese flat out said she wasn't settling for the same shit we did this year, doubling down that getting good players and great players was a non-negotiable part of her future in Chicago. It didn't sound like a so-called franchise player trying to grow with her team. It sounded like a brat trying to gut her roster on live record. Let's see what Angel Reese had to say. I'm not settling for the same shit we did this year. Oh boy. Reese told the Tribune, we had to get good players. We have to get great players. That's a non-negotiable for me. I'm willing and wanting to play with the best. And however I can help to get the best here, that's what I'm going to do this off-season. So it's going to be very, very important this off-season to make sure we attract the best of the best, because we can't settle for what we have this year. Overhaul this roster. The problem? That interview didn't just rattle a few feathers. It reportedly infuriated teammates and veterans around the league. Word came out that a locker room sit-down had to be organized just to talk about the fallout. That isn't what happens in healthy teams. That's damage control. Imagine someone who hasn't yet proven herself and suddenly half the team needs a meeting because of your mouth. That's not leadership. That's dysfunction. So instead, multiple sources told front office was that the entire team has seen Angel Reese comments that teammates are unhappy with the direct attacks. A team meeting is planned at which players are expected to address Reese directly. Of all her comments, one of the ugliest shots was pointed at Courtney Vandersloot. Even though Vandersloot was out for the season due to an ACL injury, Reese brushed her aside in dismissive terms, alluding to being too old for the present and future of the Sky. And that cut deep, because Vandersloot isn't just any player. She's a respected veteran point guard with championship pedigree and one of the best court managers the league has ever seen. Carelessly tossing her in the dust does more than insult Vandersloot. It alienates the veteran still playing in the league, who knows she's earned every ounce of respect. We can't rely on Courtney to come back at that age that she's at, Reese said. I know she'll be a great asset for us, but we can't rely on that. We need someone probably a little younger with some experience, somebody who's been playing the game and is willing to compete for a championship and has done it before. Courtney Vandersloot, by the way, 2-time WNBA champion, 5-time All-Star, 2-time All-WNBA first team, left the New York Liberty, a championship caliber team, to come help out the Chicago. Oh damn. And here's where the irony takes over. The Chicago front office had already gone out of their way to build around Reese. Don't forget, they gave up Sonia Citron, who, by the way, is in the middle of a Rookie of the Year race and already became an All-Star in her first year, to bring in Ariel Atkins. That was supposed to be the move that gave Reese exactly what she wanted. Established talent to win now. But instead of gratitude, Reese acted like the staff and roster were never good enough. You can't complain about the front office not trying when they sacrificed a potential franchise cornerstone just for your benefit. It is look at okay at Chicago. Is that a research? She doesn't believe our teammates, Rachel Wyman or Haley Benlith, are capable of leading them to the player or will or leading the playoff team. God, Ariel Atkins is another player on the Sky roster. With WNBA championship experience, we are aware of it, Mar stated. We are addressing it. This would have been frustrating enough if she only went after the veterans, but she didn't stop there. Even younger teammates like Haley Van Leth couldn't escape the shade, implying that the whole team was either too old, too mid, or too soft. Suddenly, veterans felt insulted, younger players felt dismissed, and the one person tying the locker room together ended up being the common enemy. Reese wanted a team rally, but she wound up turning all the frustration inward, right at her. And when you look at her on-court impact at the same time, it's clear why this whole power play backfired. If you're going to put yourself above the rest of the roster, you'd better be backing it up with dominance. Instead, Reese became the one out of sync, the one who didn't fit into the system she wanted to reshape. In other words, the vision she imagined might have ended up spotlighting the truth Chicago didn't want to admit. Their biggest problem might not be the roster she criticized. It might be Angel Reese herself. And what makes that sting even more? While she kept demanding upgrades and great players, she couldn't even manage one of the most basic things on court, keeping the ball in her own hands. What if the very player who was demanding a roster overhaul was actually the one dragging her own team down? That's exactly what happened with Angel Reese. On paper, she put up numbers, around 14 to 15 points per game and a double-digit rebound average. Sounds solid at first glance, but when you look closer, she's leading the entire WNBA in turnovers, despite missing several weeks of action with injury. Think about that for a second. She sat out, played fewer minutes than most stars, and still managed to rack up more giveaways than anyone else. That isn't dominance. Turnovers can happen when a player tries to force the game, but with Reese, it wasn't just about being aggressive. It reflected impatience, bad decision-making, and an inability to keep control under pressure, and her issues didn't stop there. She also struggled with discipline in another column: technical fouls. You don't want to see your supposed cornerstone leader constantly jawing at referees, losing composure, and racking up whistles that hurt your own team. Yet Reese hit that disciplinary threshold faster than any player should, picking up her 8th technical foul of the season, which by league rule meant an automatic 1-game suspension. But that suspension, it didn't come on some random Tuesday either. It hit right before a crucial matchup against the Indiana Fever. Fans had been circling that game for weeks, featuring the Indiana Fever versus the Chicago Sky, a rivalry the league tried to market, and Reese managed to knock herself out of it. Not because of injury, not for rest, but for striking Aaliyah Edwards in the head on a rebound play. Whether you believe it was intentional or not, referees saw enough to call it, and the league had no choice but to enforce the suspension. That's not just a personal embarrassment, that's a direct hit to your own team at the worst possible time. Angel Reese, oh damn, has been assessed with 8 technical fouls, and she will be suspended for Friday game unless it is rescinded. And I'm telling you right now, look, he said about her attitude. That mug ain't getting rescinded. Angel Reese has struck out again, and the irony here is too rich to ignore. The Chicago Sky, supposedly built around Reese, often looked like a more cohesive and energetic team when she wasn't on the floor. The ball moved better, they defended with more urgency, and sometimes they even pulled out wins without her. Think about how backwards that is. Usually the mark of a star is that their presence raises the team's ceiling. In Reese's case, the less she played, the more often her team found success. A franchise player in reverse. If you ask Sky fans whether they felt like Reese was the foundation for the future, many would probably tell you it feels more like they're stuck with an anchor holding them down. She wanted to prove she was the centerpiece, but the results painted a very different picture. What good are 15 points and 12 rebounds if they're buried under clumsy turnovers, constant arguments with refs, and suspensions at the worst moments? Watching Reese on the court wasn't watching a savior. It was watching a liability you couldn't depend on when the season hit its key moments. Now, how many players are going to listen to what Angel Reese had to say about Courtney Vandersloot? Are going to listen to what Angel Reese had to say about her current teammates? How many players are going to say, oh yeah, I want to play with that player, who has no problem throwing me under the bus with 3 games to go. I want to play with that. Maybe not many, and that lack of stability exposes the real contrast, because while Reese was burning bridges and dragging her own team lower, another young star was taking the opposite approach, which sets us up perfectly to look at the kind of leadership and professionalism that Caitlin Clark brought to Indiana. Now here's the difference. While Angel Reese was busy tossing shade at her own teammates, Caitlin Clark was doing the opposite. Clark has been in the most intense spotlight any player has probably faced in WNBA history. Every detail of her career is magnified, every game is under a microscope, and every mistake becomes a headline. You'd expect that to wear someone down, but Clark handled it with patience and professionalism right from the start. Even when she went down with injuries, she still traveled with the Indiana Fever, sitting on the sidelines, cheering on her teammates, and making sure her presence was felt. That showed commitment. Reese, meanwhile, stayed away from her team when she was hurt, leaving her teammates to carry on without her. Clark's way of carrying herself has gone far beyond showing up on the sideline. She's shown real sportsmanship in ways you don't often see from young players. One of the clearest examples came when she publicly praised Angel Reese's performance in a game, even though the two are supposed to be rivals. Well, at least in Reese's head. Instead of feeding into unnecessary drama, Clark gave Reese credit where she thought it was deserved. Think about the difference there. While Reese used interviews to criticize her own roster, Clark used hers to build bridges with both teammates and opponents. That's leadership, plain and simple. And the impact on her own roster is impossible to ignore. When Clark is on the floor, Aaliyah Boston looks freer, more confident, and more dominant in the paint. Guards like Lexi Hull and Kelsey Mitchell spread out and find better looks because Clark's passing draws defenses out of position. Even Sophie Cunningham, who thrives on spacing and energy, fits perfectly with the style Clark brings to the floor. What makes it stand out is Clark doesn't just score. She makes the whole unit function better. That's why she's led the league in assists last year at above 9 assists per game, and still averaged well over 8 assists per game this year, despite missing so many games because of injury. Yeah, I'm proud of this group. I think we've shown a whole season long, like, they're resilient, they're connected, they pull for each other, they enjoy one another, they celebrate one another, and, that stuff alone is good for 10 to 12 points a game. And, for this group, the way that they share the ball, how unselfish they are, I'm really proud of them. It's not been ideal circumstances all season long, but they've shown the character of who they are. They've been resilient, they've responded, to adversity, and they continue to elevate one another. And, I couldn't be more proud, of this group than I am at this moment. The media noticed too. Everything written about Indiana lately centers around Clark being the model of professionalism. How she talks about her teammates, how she supports her locker room, how she sets an example with her preparation. Compare that to Reese, who had to backtrack and apologize for publicly taking shots at her roster after that Tribune piece. It's a night and day contrast. One so-called superstar told the world her team wasn't enough. The other actual superstar made the people around her stronger. That's why the Fever have hope. They're not just playing better basketball, they're being led with maturity beyond Clark's years. She set a culture in Indiana that Chicago desperately needs and hasn't found. And when you line that up against Reese's missteps, her downfall doesn't just look like bad luck. It looks like the result of her own choices. Picture this. One franchise player has fans buying tickets months in advance, while the other has her own teammates holding emergency meetings to talk about locker room drama. Guess which franchise people are excited about? The Indiana Fever are moving forward with momentum behind Caitlin Clark. They were a lottery team the year before she arrived, but now they're pushing into the playoff picture, grabbing national TV slots and selling out arenas. Meanwhile, in Chicago, Angel Reese has turned what should have been a promising rebuild into a circus of apologies, complaints, and more questions than answers. Fans aren't looking at the sky asking about championships. They're wondering if the front office regrets every decision tied to her. Nothing but a mystery surrounds Angel Reese. Angel Reese has taken this season off to focus on her off-court endeavors and to avoid these losses that the Chicago Sky are accumulating, to avoid them appearing on her resume. Angel Reese doesn't really care about basketball. Clark even handled her injury stretches with maturity. She didn't hide at home or disappear during tough stretches. She hopped on planes, showed up in street clothes, and sat with her teammates. Contrast that with Reese, who stayed away while injured, leaving others to keep Chicago afloat with no sign of leadership from the player they were supposed to be rallying behind. Her absence only added to the feeling she wasn't all in. The Fever's supporting cast is thriving beside Clark. Aaliyah Boston is building towards superstardom in the paint. Lexi Hull is playing with more confidence thanks to the spacing Clark creates. Kelsey Mitchell is having one of her best years, and Sophie Cunningham has slotted perfectly into that mix. Clark doesn't just score. She reshapes the floor and puts people in positions to succeed. I think it just says a lot about who we have as human beings. That was one of the things that we made a priority in the off season of, who we bring to this organization. Number one, quality human beings, selfless human beings, that want to pull for one another, that understand, we have this depth for a reason, and sometimes it creates challenges getting people on the floor, but in situations like this is why you have it. And, I'm just, she's right. I mean, as a pro, and as a pro coach, this is one of the most connected groups I've seen, and the proof of Indiana's rise. They're smashing attendance records, pushing merchandise sales, and consistently earning primetime coverage. The Sky? A measly 10-win, 30-loss record, chasing the worst in the league, endless suspension headlines, and a frustrated fan base that isn't seeing progress. Chicago fans are openly venting about chaos, and pointing fingers at Reese's so-called leadership. That's where Clark and Reese couldn't be farther apart. Clark's professionalism is the reason veterans want to play with her. Reese's complaints make big names want nothing to do with Chicago. And the stats back it up. Indiana wins more when Clark is on the court, while Chicago often looks better when Reese is off. Which brings us to the bigger question. Was Angel Reese ever the right bet for the Sky? Angel Reese wanted Chicago's roster rebuilt around her, but the irony is the Sky might realize their biggest problem is her. A player can't demand greatness while leading the league in turnovers and watching her team win more without her on the floor. Analysts and fans are already framing her as toxic, with one calling her a liability you can't build around. Meanwhile, Indiana sees Caitlin Clark as the professional, team-first leader the WNBA needs.